Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest. We have Willie Tenorio. Did I pronounce that right, Willie?
Yes, yes.
Oh, great.
Thank
And then
you.
absolutely great to have you on the podcast. And we have our co-host, Corinne French.
Hey, glad to be here.
Awesome. So it's the weekend, and we have this podcast on the weekend too. We record all the time, so we're always having special guests on. And today we're going to talk about MASBA and equity in school districts. But before we get into the topic, Willie, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm a former accountant. I call myself a reformed accountant because I used to do that for a while, and it wasn't as much fun as I thought it would be. So I switched over to IT, and been a school board member. I was a school board member at Hays CISD for 12 years, 2009 to just a few weeks ago. And I've really enjoyed the time on my school board. I have 4 children. And I really believe that education is what changes the trajectory of people's lives, and the better education that we can provide students, kids, the better that their life will turn out. So I think it's like a very noble work that we're doing.
Absolutely.
Gary, I met Willie in our leadership TASB class back in 2014. Can you believe that, Willie? That seems like almost forever ago.
It does. I remember, it was leadership TASB is great. And I think that's great for, especially a great thinking point for this podcast, because you learn so much there. I mean, you make so many friends. I mean, Corinne and I have been friends since that point in time, and we always love reconnecting with each other. Now Corinne knows my wife, and we all, see each other at like conferences and stuff like that. So that's awesome. I think 2015 is the best class ever. Just in my opinion,
for sure.
The graduate of 2015. And I highly encourage anybody to apply for that, because I think that I have this theory. I have theories for everything. So I have this theory that if you're a board member, one of the things that you should be doing is having a plan for your development. So like you walk in and you're a new board member, and you have ideas and you have strengths that you're bringing in, but there's a lot of things that you need to know that you don't know. And so things like leadership TASB, things like going to TASB conferences, MASBA conferences to go take classes, it just makes you stronger and better. And it gives you a chance to improve and be better all the time, so you can do the best for the students in your district.
Well, and I love that you're saying that, because you mentioned your wife. And yes, I think we come to that leadership TASB space and we meet these people from across the state. It's a very selective group. It's the highest level training you can get as a trustee. Then we become friends, and then we meet each other's families, and then it's almost like this sorority fraternity for public good, that it gets part of us. And so when we see each other on Facebook, or we see our families growing and things happening, it feels like it's your sister or your brother. And leadership TASB just brought that for me to connect me to the rest of the state. And so I'm so thankful that I got to meet you back in 2014. And I have to say, one of the coolest moments ever in my life is watching when you became president of MASBA. And I was sitting there. So just for our audience sake, MASBA is the Mexican American School Board Association. TASB, Texas Association of School Boards. Like, we have all these acronyms, but all of the acronyms all boil down to wanting to see equity. All students have the best access to public ed in our state. And so tell me, did you know that moment when we met at Leadership TASB and you started working through your leadership development? Did you know then that you'd be president of MASBA?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. And I think that, being part of Leadership TASB helped prepare me for that, because one, it's like an amazing cohort of people who are super dedicated, that they're willing to spend a lot of extra time beyond what most trustees are going to do. They're going to come to these classes all over the state. They're going to work on a project that's very tough, in person and literally on conference calls in between meetings. And it's a lot of work. And so like it builds you into a better person and builds you into a better leader. So I had been on the board for a while. I'd been on the MASBA board for several years, and then I became the secretary. And then, I thought, well, I'm going to run for president and see what happens. I think I proved my leadership there. And so I ran, and it was great. I love the organization because it makes, we cover topics at MASBA that you may not see in other places. So we'll do a lot more on English language learners. We'll do things on dual language. We'll talk about a lot of people don't know that there's 4 different models the state will allow for language development for kids that are learning English. And, there's difference, and depending on your district and what your needs are, different models will impact you better. And there's research behind all the models that shows that, compares them. So we talk about things like that. And so it gives people an opportunity to learn about things that they may not learn anywhere else. And I think it's real powerful. And just before I wanted to kind of mention this. So I want to brag on my wife. My wife, Daphne, she's a city council person, or was a city council person in Kyle, Texas. And so while I was the president of MASBA, which is the largest Hispanic organization for school board members in the state, she became president of AMO, Association of Municipal Hispanic Officials, which was the organization that's like the MASBA equivalent for city council members.
Mhm.
And she actually sat on the TML board, Texas Municipal League, which is like the TASB for city councils.
Mhm.
So just want to throw that in there. Proud.
I love her. Please
Thank
please
you.
go give her a really big hug for me later. I miss her.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Gary's like Gary's learning like how many people in the state we have these great connections, and we have such love for one another because we really care about closing that achievement gap. And so I know Gary's probably dying to ask a question, but I'm going to ask the first one. Willie, why is it important to close the achievement gap?
It's really important because I think that one of the obligations of us as board members and administrators and school districts and such is that we get as close as possible to the best educational outcome for every student. And if you have gaps where Hispanic and Black students, for example, are not scoring as well in reading as others, that's going to impact their educational opportunities down the road. So when we do things to look for ways to decrease those gaps, where we do our part to provide more equity, provide resources that may be needed if some kids need to catch up, what happens is that you end up with a student, when they get out of the educational system, they're more equipped to do more things, and they have more options and opportunities available to them. Whether you go to college or not, if you're a better reader, you'll always do better. If you know more math better, you'll balance your checkbook better. You'll do some, if you're on some kind of job site and you need to do some math or something, you'll be able to do that too, whatever your thing that you're going to go do later. So it really makes a big difference. One of the things that I learned is that, and I didn't know this until maybe last few years, is that there's different ways to teach reading. So that there's some ways that you teach reading show that you get a better outcome regardless of the income level, the educational level of the parents. That are big factors and a lot of times determining how well kids do in school. Certain ways that you teach reading work across the board. And if a school district looks at things like that, then they improve educational attainment for every group and also close some gaps at the same time. So I think it's really important because we build a system within our school district that can create a better outcome for all the students, and that's very important to me.
Okay, Willie, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
But before I ask one of the questions, I'll ask the first one, I guess. So as I talk to different people about equity, right, the equity gap, it seems like there's some nuances and maybe even slightly different definitions. Could you give your definition of equity and the equity gap?
Sure. So how I think about that is I think about what someone needs to be successful. So I'll give you an example. So like if if you've never had anybody in your family go to college, for example, that's different than if you've been in a family where everybody's been going to college. So, like I went to college, and so like that was a lot easier for my kids because I knew what was going on. I understood the process. I knew what you needed to do to prepare for that. Sometimes if you have a student, for example, who really doesn't have nobody within their family who's been there before, they may need extra help to get there. So they may need extra counseling. So they make sure they know that which classes they need to get in because their parents may not know. They may need more study skills help. Avid is a good example. Avid is a program that's been around for a long time that some school districts have adopted, because what it does is it provides extra opportunities for kids to learn about college, extra opportunities to catch people up, extra opportunities to provide stronger study skills. And so my definition of equity is that sometimes somebody needs a little their assistance in a different way, or needs help in a different way, and so you provide what they need. Sometimes if you provide a one size fits all type of deal education, it doesn't always get you the best possible outcome because everybody's different. So that's how I think of equity.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. And kind of building off of that, what would you say are the top three, maybe, I don't know what the right word is. What are the top three things that are preventing that are keeping that gap as wide as it is in Texas anyways? So, is it funding? Is it teachers that, great teachers? Is it, I mean, what is it exactly that's preventing a student in one school, or the top three things that are, maybe it's not even school based, maybe, I don't know, I'm learning here. But what are the top three things that are kind of keeping that gap in place?
Well, I think there's different things that may factor into that. I think that sometimes you can look at factors within the school and factors outside of the school. So like say when you think about terms of factors within the school, things that they're in the control of the school, sometimes there's some belief gaps. Like I remember when I was several years ago, we were having a meeting among school board members, and that we were talking about a particular school that needed some help. And one of the school members says, I want to see what we can do to get more kids at this particular school to go to college. And so they were talking about that. And then another board member kind of pops in and says, and I'm going to rephrase the way they said it. I'm going to make it a little bit more succinct. And basically they just felt like that, that was the school where they weren't going to, those kids were not going to succeed as well going to college, and you shouldn't expect them to. And the school board member was basically saying that, they need these other things, but you discount the going to college part. And so sometimes you get some beliefs that are holding them back. If the administrators or if the school board members have certain beliefs about what's capable, then they'll be reflected in the opportunities they present and the resources they allocate. So those are some things that need to be worked within the school system itself. And then there's things, outside of the school system. If you have a lot more poverty, if you have a lot of lack of other resources outside in the community, it's going to impact the student. So it's harder for them, to navigate the school experience as well. So I think that's a kind of a combination. I think there's factors within the school system, factors outside of the school system that have to come into play. So I think as educational leaders, I think what we can do is look at what we do, what we can control, and then maybe even see what we can do to impact things outside of our school system. I'll give you an example. One time an organization locally came to the school board and they said, we wanted to do a little study with y'all. We wanted, basically, I think they were going to get it's been a long time, but if I remember correctly, it was like, we want the kindergarten teachers and the pre-K teachers and the first grade teachers to help us collect some data on the students that are coming in and the resources that they have available to them, and so that we can try to address those resources in their community. And so the nonprofit said, if you'll spend some time doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to go, and if there's, transportation issues getting to school, if there's issues with, other things like food security or something, they would work on that type of thing. And so there was a little bit of a discussion at the school board. Some of the board members wanted to do it, and some of the board members didn't want to do it. They said, well, it's not really our responsibility to be doing this. This is going to create more work for the teachers and such. And then what ended up happening is we decided we were going to do that. And one of the board members that didn't want to do it, I think the reason she changed her mind is that she saw it as a way for us to kind of make a positive impact outside of the school system, and the homes of the kids too, through that particular outreach that the nonprofit would do with our help. And so I think that's something we can do as leaders, educational leaders. We can work on everything that we have control over, and we can slowly increase our impact on things we don't think we have as much control over time. It's not an easy thing to do, but as a board, we ended up going forward with that, and I'm glad we did. So I think those are different ways to address that.
That's interesting that you say that, because it seems like it's a combination of factors internally and externally, as you described. And so from an innovation standpoint, it could be a number of things, it sounds like. Do you find that within public education, there's kind of a tug of war between that thinking outside the box and feeling like they're constrained, inside the box? I don't know if that makes sense. We've talked a little bit about innovation in public education, and obviously there's a lot of, I don't know if bureaucracy is the right word, government, you have different processes. The public education has very clear rules and regulations and things that a lot of things I don't even know about. But it does seem like there are some limitations on being nimble and doing things differently. Is that preventing some of the solutions to this equity problem at all, or do you see that at all? Or maybe I'm in left field here.
I'm not sure. I think that one of the things that I really liked about my time on the MASBA board, and what I think a lot of people have told me who've gone to MASBA, is they'll say things like, there's other possibilities for things that we can do that other people have already done. And I just don't know, because I'm living within the bubble of my own school district or my own regional area. And, I go to a place like MASBA and I talk to other members, and they're doing something that's really successful, and they've already done it and they've implemented it successful. I didn't know about this until I learned it from this person. But if I go back and I try this, I might just be as successful too. So I think sometimes there's you have a chance to kind of think outside the box the more that you deliberately expose yourself to more possibilities and changes. That's one of the reasons I think Texas has got such a great, robust educational system with TASB and with MASBA and with the Black Caucus, because they bring people in from all over the state together. And, you get an opportunity to learn something different, in those educational classes. Like, I'll give you a real, a non-equity example, but like if you're going to do a bond, for example, and you're trying to, improve your school district, there's different types of bonds that you can do. There's different ways to approach that particular thing. The different school districts do it differently. Some organize a committee, some don't. There's different things that you can learn about there. There's different ways to save money, energy wise, for example. There's different programs to do that. There's lots of different ways to do it. You may not know until you come in to a different environment to learn about it. And so I think sometimes there might be, the more input that you have, the more innovative and creative you get. Because, like for people that read a lot of books, for example, I understand y'all are both big time readers, is what I've heard. I know Corinne posted about that. The more input that you come in with, and the more, you tend to be creative. You tend to improve the way you think. And I think that is helpful. And so I think the more opportunities that people have to improve their thinking, improve the experiences that they're getting, I think that plays a role in the how innovative, a district ends up being.
Mhm.
Okay.
No, I will. So you mentioned something that I'm stuck on because it's something that I think is so important, the belief gap. And I think that so there's so many ways you can go about this. If there's a gap, there are gaps in education. There's all kinds of gaps that we could address in this podcast. It's not long enough for us to do it today. But when you think of the belief gap, Willie, knowing that we have on Wednesday, I'll be filing for reelection, and there'll be people across our state who are going to file for school board and all kinds of other roles. You mentioned your wife at the municipal level, and there are all kinds of places for people who can make decent, good decisions. They do not have to be perfect. Their lives don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be perfect to step into this role of public service. What are some of your tips, I know like Gary's asked like for a couple 3 things in that other area. What are some of your best tips and encouragement to people that are going to be running for boards that are making changes in the next couple of years, municipalities, just in general, like people who want to serve? What are some of your best tips? And I guess with the understanding of that belief gap, because I love that, because we have to believe that all people, everyone needs our best efforts. And certainly the children in our state deserve our best efforts. So do you have some tips or some advice for boards, municipalities, people wanting to run?
Well, recently, because I just stepped off the board, I got invited to a group of parents invited me because they wanted to learn more of how to impact their local board, and they wanted to know, some of them were thinking of running for the school board, maybe and so they asked me to come on like a Zoom webinar, and I spoke on there, and that was one of the things they talked about. They wanted to know, whether, some of them were thinking about running now or in the future from the different school districts that they were representing in that Zoom meeting. And I said, well, some of them were a little apprehensive because they didn't know if they were ready to do it. They said it seemed so complicated, and they weren't sure if they could do it. And I told them, well, look, this is how I view it. I had a conversation with a school board member about a couple of years ago, and his background was in transportation. So he was like for a city, he was the transportation manager. And so he was a little nervous because he just got on the board and he felt like he didn't really know what he was doing at that point yet. He knew he was a smart guy, but it's overwhelming. And so I said, well, what I told him really applies to everybody. We were coming in with some strengths. In his case, he knew a lot about transportation. So obviously we have busing, and the district he was in is a big district. So his experience there was going to be directly correlated to some of the things that he's going to see. He also knew a lot about purchasing, and school boards purchase stuff a lot. So he had a good background there. A lot of things he doesn't know. And for the case, for all of us, there's other things that we don't know. But we can trust ourselves that if you really have a desire to help your community and you communicate with your community, you can learn more and more about what you need as you go. And things like going to the educational classes that MASBA and TASB have is a good way to do it. Talking to people, just learning more and more and more, because I think the most important criteria for serving on the school board is that you want to increase the betterment of your community, and you want to increase the betterment of your students, and everything else will fall into place. If you have that, that's the thing. That's the most important ingredient. You can't give that to somebody, but if you have that, everything else you can accumulate over time. And you can do it with your fellow board members who may know more about some things, and you can rely on them all. But that's the encouragement I give you. I think if it's in your heart, take a shot at it. Go run for your school board. If you're not sure if you want to do that, do things like get on the district leadership team or a campus leadership team, or the state health, the SHAC, the Advisory
Mhm.
Council for Health. I always forget the
Mhm.
acronym.
Mhm.
Do something like that, and then you'll get some experience, and then maybe you'll be able to run soon. Hutto ISD has this thing, when they were at the last MASBA conference, where you can actually go and to their Hutto University, and you can sign up to learn about the school district. And it's like a multiple month class where, you go once a Saturday, once a month. And then by the time you get out there, you know a lot about education, finance, you know about their transportation, you know about curriculum, and if you want to go on a committee there, you have some knowledge. If you want to run for school board, you definitely have some knowledge. And so they have a way of building, their
Mhm.
bench that way. But I think, you can definitely, like I said, if you have the heart for it, go for it.
Mhm.
I think the rest will fall into place.
Thanks, Willie. I think that adds to the belief topic that
Mhm.
Corinne was referencing as well, that, believe in yourself, believe that you can do it. And definitely great that some school districts have that platform to kind of get people ready to run for school board. That's awesome. It ties back to one of our previous topics we had, and getting the community involved and getting them educated and ready, and building that belief. Well, we're running short on time. Before we close out, Willie, any last thoughts before we close out the podcast?
Well, I think that, um, serving on the school board for 12 years was one of the best experiences of my life.
Mhm.
Um, because you make decisions that make impacts. And I think, I don't always tell a lot of people this, but I think, like, several years before I ran for the school board, I think I had my midlife crisis early. I was a young guy to have a midlife crisis. And I had written down some ideas of things I wanted to do. And one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to make a better educational impact, because I thought that made a difference. My, my, I did not know this until one day when I got really vain and I wanted to Google myself and see what I showed up as in the Google listings. So I Googled Willie Tenorio, and it shows up as there's this dissertation from a student at now it's at Texas State. It was called Southwest Texas State back then. Now it's Texas State University, and my name's in there. So wait. This was written like long time ago, and this is about my dad, because I'm a junior and he's a senior. And so I find something there, and it says in there that he worked on a project where he went with a couple of other people in the community, and they did a petition to hold an election to integrate the local public school system in Kyle, Texas. And I
Wow.
had no idea. My dad never told me this, And so so I didn't know. I was like, wow, this is cool. And so I had always thought about that, before I ever ran for school board, things like my dad did. And then I found out that my grandfather, and I'm not sure the exact year, but I'm guessing it was like in the maybe like late 30s, early 40s. They tried to integrate the public school system back before, and he had failed. But because back then there was like three different schools. There was a white school, a black school, and a Mexican school. And and this was a rural area, and they still had three separate schools. And so
Wow.
he tried to integrate those at that time, and he failed at that time. And so even though he didn't get into the research paper, he actually worked with my dad, and they were successful eventually later. And so those types of things make a difference. So whatever, I think that, sometimes people get called for stuff, and I think if you're called, to serve people in the educational field, it's a calling.
Mm.
It's a lot of rough work, and it burns people out sometimes, and it burns, board members out, and teachers out, and administrators out. But, for whatever time you want to devote to it, it's something that's very noble, and something that's always going to leave a legacy, whether it's a small legacy or a big legacy. And, it's going to impact other people within that community. And so I love all the school board members out there, not just because I was one, because I know what they can do to further advance their communities. So I'll leave y'all with that.
That's powerful. That is a really powerful message, Willie. That's wow. I don't know how to respond to that. Corinne,
Well, usually you throw it to me and ask if I have something to say at the end, and I'm like crying here because Willie, to know that your grandfather and your father and then you have done so much to further the work and make education accessible, equitable, honorable for all is like I already knew how cool you were, but I didn't know that about your father and your grandfather. So thanks for sharing that. So I'm trying to fight back the tears here, but I know you have some young children and you have older children, and we talked a little bit about some of maybe your best moments and things you're proud of, but what's your big dream for public ed in Texas? I know what would you say to me running again and other colleagues that are still doing this work? What's your big dream?
My big dream is that we'll get to the point where you're going to get better educational outcomes for everybody, where I think the achievement gaps will be a thing of the past. I think it's going to take some time to get there, but it's already happening in different parts of the state. It just needs to get everywhere. And that's my dream. And that's one of the reasons that I did what I did. And one of the things that I'm going to try to do is I'm starting an educational podcast, and I've been kind of inspired by y'all. So y'all will be
Awesome.
one of my guests. I don't even have a name. We're hoping that we launch in March. So I don't have a name for it yet. But if you go to my Twitter at Willie Tenorio, Tenorio, Willie Tenorio, that's my educational Twitter account, and I'll put something out on about there. But hopefully that will launch, because I think there's a lot of things that there's a lot of knowledge and information and just success stories that I think need to be shared. And I want to join y'all and, kind of be y'all, in a nice cohort of people who are doing that. So hopefully y'all will hear from me soon there.
Amazing. It's interesting when you start a podcast and then when you end the podcast, how some of these stories that are shared and they can just change how you feel. Because it's, I started the podcast off meeting somebody new, and now I'm just motivated and inspired. That was such an inspiring story, Willie. I mean, hearing about your father, that had to be so moving and motivational to read that. Well, I know we're short on time, so I'm going to close us out. But before I do that, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact is a faith-based company that is giving funding to school districts, and it's not a grant. They actually use technology and energy savings to provide funding, and it could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in revenue, additional revenue per year to school districts. And they're not trying to sell air conditioning systems or lighting systems. They have patented technology that optimizes the systems that are already there to try to get them to last as long as possible, which also it saves on capital expenses as well. So you get that sustainable recurring revenue, but also can possibly save on capital expenditures because of the longevity of the systems. And so thank you, Ideal Impact. Thank you for the funding. They provided $1.5 billion, over 160 districts in Texas so far. So if you have a district that needs additional funding or just wants additional funding, reach out to Ideal Impact, or feel free to send me an email at Gary, GARYD, at idealimpactinc.com. And Willie, thank you again for being on the podcast. Corinne, thank you again for being an awesome co-host. And for those of y'all that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.